Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all for having me here. This is my crowd. This is Columbia Rotary. Most of you in this room I know and have known for a very long time. You've supported me, supported my family, my law firm, my Gamecocks, and I thank you for that on the bottom of my heart before we get started here today. Many of you that I could point out are clients and friends, but I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, obviously, Jonathan and I not only were former law partners, we continue to have cases together, and I value his friendship and his leadership in the bar. Marion Moses is here, another member of the bar. I saw Billy over here, who I've known forever, who's a Gamecock as well, and Judge Joe Anderson, who I have great respect for, and we ought to be all thankful for a federal judge of his caliber in this state. But I also had some clients here. Please don't hold this against me. But he's also a neighbor, Dan Lee in the back. Was Ferian, of course. We live together, live out in the Ascot area together, and are good friends as well. And so those of you I didn't mention specifically, let me thank you from the bottom of my heart. I've known you for a long time in this community, and I respect it. And Terrence, let me thank you. I've been to 1,000 Rotary clubs. I've never done the Macarena with the crowd during the whole time. That was great. To support everybody involved in this. I love these events, and how nice is this to be back and see Sewell get started for football again. It reminded me of a story. As good as that meal was, and as good as this fellowship is, Joe Morrison, when I first got to South Carolina, he was my coach. Coach Morrison's not like today's coach that are all charismatic. They're more CEOs than football coaches on the field. He was the man in black. He was quiet, reserved. He had 14 years in the NFL, and he just was pure football. All this other stuff of talks and television shows and working with the media was not his dig. He invited me to come over. That first year I came over with him, he was going to speak to the Home Builders Association. And I saw my friend Jimmy Derrick here earlier as well. He'll remember back at that time in 1985, that was not a great time in the housing industry at that time. And everybody in the Home Builders Association had been struggling economically at that time. Well, Coach Morrison and I come over, and of course I'm kind of hanging in the corner as this freshman quarterback who's getting ready to come at the University of South Carolina, and Joe's doing his thing, and they had a meet and greet beforehand, and there was a cocktail party, and Coach Morrison, like he normally would did, had a few cocktails, and then he comes up to the podium to do his talk, and I'm sitting at one of these early front tables as well, and he starts his talk out this way. Thank you all for having me here tonight, and Lord knows I hope the economy comes back around, because that's the worst damn liquor I've ever tasted in my life. That's a true story. Well, I can tell you that was a great meal by Sewell's as well, and great to be with y'all always. It also reminds me when we got to talking about God and heaven and church, about the first time that I really learned what it is to sit up in front of an audience like this and making sure you understand what you're about to talk about. And that was right before my senior year. Joe Morrison had passed away before I was a senior at Carolina, and Sparky Woods comes into the program. And Lord knows I had a lot of writing on that year. I decided to come back to Carolina, forego a chance to potentially go on and at that time challenge the rule and go on into the NFL, which some players did the following year as a quarterback, came back to South Carolina. Then Coach Morrison died. Sparky comes in, he gets me before the spring practice, says, Taj, you're going to be one of my leaders on the team this year. I've already chosen you as a captain. You're a 3-time MVP of this football team. I want you to lead the team in the Lord's Prayer prior to the first ball game. And I see some smirks on your faces because some of you have heard this before, but I don't care. I'm going to tell it anyway. So I said, Coach, I'm your guy. This is my year, my team. We got to have a great season. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'll lead the team in the Lord's Prayer before the Duke ball game. Well, not knowing then what I know now is that I'm a great delegator. I decided to get my 2 offensive linemen to do it. I've got this routine that I do before the game. I got dressed the same way. I talked to the same guys. I went over the same plays in preparation. Very superstitious about how I did that. So I got my right tackle, Calvin Stevens, from the mountains of North Carolina, 6'3", 315 pounds, incredible Christian, had a great faith. And I got my left tackle, Ike Harris, Ike 6'5", 305, not quite the Christian my boy Calvin was, let's just say that. I got them together and I said, listen guys, Coach wants me to lead the team in the Lord's Prayer prior to the Duke ball game. You know I've got my routine down. I know the offensive line is the true leader of any football team, and y'all are going to lead the team in the Lord's Prayer prior to the first ball game. Well, Ike, right off the bat, starts laughing. Ain't no way I'm going to say the Lord's Prayer before the first ball game. Ain't no way. Well, Calvin's face, he looked right at me, and I could tell you the fear of God was in his face at that time. He was so shy, and he says, I'll do it. Well, Ike starts laughing. He don't know the Lord's Prayer. I swear to God, he don't know the Lord's Prayer. I'll bet you $5. And I said, we got 3 weeks. Let's get this thing together before the Duke ball game. I forgot all about it again. Sure enough, I mean, we're in the game time. We come off the field from warming up, and I remembered it. I gathered them up over there. I said, Coach is getting ready to come in. Y'all got this together? Ike started laughing. He don't know it. He don't know the Lord's Prayer. I swear, I bet you he don't know the Lord's Prayer. I got $5 with it. And Calvin said, I'm ready. He was so nervous. Sparky comes in. He gives us this rousing speech. He pulled us all in together. We put our hands in the pile like that. Sparky looked at me, and I bumped Ike, and Ike bumped Calvin, and Calvin said, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Ike said, I'll be damned. I didn't think he knew it. Gave me $5. That's major college football for you there, right there, folks. Thank goodness we beat Duke that day. That was all that mattered. The point of that story is you don't get up in front of a crowd like that or this and not know what you're here to talk about. And I know you're all concerned about my law practice and my family, but I just got back from Trial Lawyers Convention in Hilton Head, one of my brotherhoods of lawyers in this area, and no one started off a conversation, how's your law practice or your family? It was, how's Gamecock football? And that's really what's on my mind. I hope it's on yours today because I want to talk a little bit about it. 42 games the Gamecocks have won in the last 4 years. Three straight 11-win seasons. 5 straight victories over the boys from the upstate. And of course, we've beaten a Big Ten football team in 3 straight years, as I see the grimace on Dan Lee's face there in the back, a Michigan man. In bowl games, never have we been at such a position. Finished the season ranked number 4 in the country. And now almost everyone has voted us in the top 10 in the country going into the season. And what are the expectations for the Gamecocks? I know that's what you want to know about. What's life after Clowney and Connor? That's really what it's all about. What's life after Clowney and Connor Shaw? And I have to tell you this story that I kept quiet until on or about this time of the year, and I hope that you'll not put it in writing and tweet it and blog it. I see we're being filmed here today by my good friend who's filmed me many times before, and I'm sure he'll use good judgment in using this. But Clowney, you talk about what an impact he had, and this is the type of guy we had, and this is what South Carolina needs. Last year, about this time, needless to say, after the hit preseason, almost everybody in the world wanted to talk to Clowney. And Clowney did a couple of interviews, and then they asked for a bunch more, and then they asked for a bunch more. And Steve Fink, who's the sports information director at South Carolina, started to not be able to get Clowney on the phone. Needless to say, you talk about tremendous. All of you are going home today. All of you are business people. All of you need to close something and be productive. All of you do. Could you imagine if you walked out the door and onto that street today and you had the chance to lose $7.5 to $14 million in a 10-second play? That's what Clowney was facing. And no one in the world, to my knowledge, faces that but about 1 or 2 guys a year. And that's what he was facing playing for us again in the 2013 season. So I think he was getting tired of the media. He was getting tired of the pressure of it. He was getting tired of all the hype. So it was harder and harder to get him on the phone to do some of these interviews. And finally, Steve Fink gets a call from Sports Illustrated and says, we're going to put him on the cover of the college football issue. So he goes through about 2 things. He texts Clowney, he calls him, he gets Clowney to call him back, and he says, listen, you have got to do this. They promise 15 minutes at Williams-Brice Stadium. They'll have a whole staff there. You go do the dress, get them ready, they'll snap it and get you out of there in 15 minutes. All right, I'll be there 15 minutes. He shows up at Williams-Brice Stadium. Needless to say, Sports Illustrated shows up with 4 assistant photographers, a photographer, a makeup person, a person who did nothing but spray to make it look like he was sweating at the time in which he was out there, and a uniform guy, all to get him in and out. So there's a dozen people in there to get this cover shot for Sports Illustrated. Clowney comes in and says, hey, y'all, hey, everybody. Everybody stops, speaks, they're still. He goes, we got it, just a couple minutes, we're still setting up. Clowney nicely but jokingly says, y'all told me 15 minutes now. And say, we'll get it right. Go ahead and get dressed. So he goes back, pulls the uniform on. The girls start getting a hold of him, got his hair, start spraying him down. He walks back out. They're still not quite ready. He says, y'all told me 15 minutes. And Steve Fink, who's about this tall, and of course Clowney is 6'6", 266 pounds, walks over to Clowney and goes, hey, JD, this is Sports Illustrated, man. This is a major coup for the university, a major coup for you. This could launch everything that you need to do. And Clowney looks down at him and goes, you think this is going to be the last time I'm on the cover of Sports Illustrated? Heck of a point, wasn't it? My point is this. That's the swagger that the University of South Carolina has needed in the last 15 or 20 years since I finished playing. And frankly, Steve Spurrier brought that swagger back to the University of South Carolina with his record career, in which now he's the winningest coach in 2 SEC programs. Nobody else has done that during his career. It's been remarkable the way he's turned it around. But we need that confidence as a state, as a community, and as Rotary. We need confidence in our town and who we are as South Carolinians. As I travel the state, and for that matter the country, they tell me 2 things. They love our beaches and our mountains. We love 2001, and Steve Spurrier's a rock star. That's what they say to me all the time, everywhere I go. And those are great things. But we all know we have a lot more to offer, whether it's business, your services and products are provided, or what we do as a community overall, and I hope that y'all will take part of that. And part of that's doing business with the University of South Carolina and our Gamecock IMG Sports Network. I hope y'all will consider contributing to what South Carolina does in a broadcast sense. And we have a big old budget, and it's not all to pay Todd Ellis, I promise you that. It's $9 million a year that we cover that. But we have great impact. I was down the beach, not in Myrtle Beach now. This was out of the country in an island with my family not long ago, true story. And I'm on the beach playing volleyball, and I got a hat on with my kids and sunglasses, and nobody would know me in the world. And sure enough, this guy comes up to me and goes, are you Todd Ellis? And obviously he heard me yelling at my kids and recognized my voice, probably is what happened. And I said, yeah, I am. And he says, oh man, I'm a big Gamecock, and I'm from up in Spartanburg, and we're down here. And I said, oh, it's great to meet y'all. We talked for a second. He said, man, can I pull my daughter over here? She's 21 years old at the University of South Carolina. Huge fan. Of course, I hear that all the time. She comes over though, and y'all, she starts cross-examining me. She knows football better than anybody I'd talked to in about 2 years. Knew about the upcoming issues we have with the team, what might be the current points. I finally said, hey, well, great, I'm gonna go back over here. And she go, wait, before you go, you gotta say it for me. You gotta say it. So I thought she was gonna say, touchdown Carolina, touchdown. She stopped me in the middle of that, and they say, no, say, it's a bright, clear Sansbury day. A 21-year-old female at the University of South Carolina knew us so well that she knew our sponsors on the broadcast, and that's the kind of people you're dealing with, and I hope you'll consider doing business with us. Now to the 2014 football team. It is a life after Connor Shaw, 27-5. 27-5, the kid never lost a game at Williams-Brice Stadium. He is the reason we have an 18-game winning streak at Williams-Brice, the longest win streak in the country. And you lose that. And what you do lose with Connor Shaw is not only a grit like almost no other one had in playing football, but the ability to move the football on 3rd down. And can he be replaced by Dylan Thompson? You darn right he can. 3-0 as a starter. He beat the Clemson Tigers up in Death Valley, which is no small part with only a week's preparation to know that he was a starter. And he has the skill set to do it. Can he move around and escape like Connor? No. That'll be the key difference is, how can we make up the difference that Connor, who produced about 30% of our 3rd down conversions in the last 4 games of the season, can we convert that to a guy who cannot clearly run as much as Connor did out of the pocket? He's not as skilled at that. And you do that by having the best line, hopefully we've had under Steve Spurrier since I've been here and since he's been here. And I've been around watching the offensive line. The offensive line is going to be excellent. The best set of running backs in the country by far combined. You can take all you want. You can take the Georgia boys. They got 2 great ones. We got 4 great ones. There's a name you're going to hear a lot in the future. I don't know if it's going to be this year, but it's going to be David Williams. And the running back from up north can play and is about 224 pounds, the 3rd fastest guy on the team He's had some hamstring issues, but he can play. And we already know what Mike Davis can do, a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate. At the wide receiver spot, you got to replace Bruce Ellington. I promise you this, and I know we've had some good ones, the Gressets of the world, the Jeff Grants of the world, the Alex Englishes of the world at South Carolina, Hank Smalls playing baseball. Jeff Grant certainly falls into that category. Bruce Ellington's the best athlete ever to play at South Carolina, period. Period. Who else beat the Clemson Tigers on a Thursday night with sinking free throws, and then a week later beat them again on the football field with a touchdown pass? That alone ought to put him in the Hall of Fame tomorrow, in my opinion. He's a fantastic athlete who we're going to miss. But we have Shaq Rowland, and we got a guy named Pharaoh Cooper that are going to step in there to do it. Shaq Rowland hopefully will realize that this is a year in which he has got to produce and mature and bring himself to a stage where he's an elite wide receiver, because he's got the skill set. He absolutely can go do it and bring it on. And then Demir Bird, one of the feistiest wide receivers in the league. So we will be as good on offense or better than we've ever been, probably averaging 35 to 38 points a game. So you change the defense, and it's post-Clowney time. And what do? Well, you rely on Lorenzo Ward, who's a very good young defensive coordinator, and he's going to change things up a little bit by continuing to move fronts around to where we have 3 down linemen and use those good linebackers who probably improved better than any group in the country last year. And then also bring in a 4-man front as well. Who should you look for around that front? Abu Lamin, the transfer in from junior college, a defensive tackle, is going to be a fantastic, one of the strongest guys I've ever seen play. There was a guy named Roy Hart. When I first came to Carolina, we could not block. And Abu is about like him on the interior defensive line. And then Darius English. Everybody, knock on wood, is a Gamecock fan. I realize everybody in this room is not, but cross your fingers for the Gamecocks. Darius English is a defensive end, as athletic as I've ever seen, but he needed to put on some more weight and build some strength. If he does that at the defensive end spot, we could be tough to beat. Linebackers as good as anybody in the country, as across the board. And the secondary, of course, we have to fill with some corners that we need to replace. But I think we'll do that. The key to college football, folks, is not how you cover in the secondary. It's how you rush the passer, because everybody's going to beat you up for the most part because the linebackers can't cover wide receivers. In the NFL, they can cover them. They can't cover the running backs in the college game. And if you get enough time at all, you're going to beat any defense out there. They run too many plays. There's too many good offensive coordinators, and the corners aren't good enough to stop anybody anyhow for the most part. So you got to rush the passer. So our corners are going to be just fine. I don't think you'll see a major drop-off in that area out there. And the freshmen are doing fine from what I heard and standing in there. The kicking game, Elliott Fry, the toughest, smallest guy in the league, literally the smallest guy on any roster. And he came back. People forget. Everybody goes, oh, the Missouri game, Connor Shaw comes off the bench. We're down 17 points. He leads us to a victory in overtime. How about the 40-yarder by Elliott Fry that tied the game to take us to overtime? He's clutch. He's very good. We'll be average in the punting game again. We always are. It doesn't matter because Steve Spurrier goes for it more than anybody else in college football on 4th down. So overall, we have an excellent team again. I know everybody likes predictions and everybody likes to quote and everybody likes to put it out on Twitter and Instagram and do whatever you may do at this point. But I like us in another double-digit season winning. There's no question about that. And I think we go back to play for the Eastern Division Championship and the SEC Championship game. I think we do win the East. I don't know whether we win that game or not. Alabama's got a fantastic young quarterback. If they get that kid together, they're going to be tough to beat. And there's some other teams on the west side that can give them some trouble. The schedule is very favorable. It's the first time in 3 years where we do not have more than 2 games back-to-back. Actually, we don't have any games back-to-back on the road. We play no more than 1 game on the road before we come back home. Of course, in 2012, we played Georgia at home, then went to go to Florida and LSU back-to-back weekends. Last year, we had 3 games on the road in a row, Tennessee, Missouri, and Arkansas. This year's schedule, there's none of that there. But, of course, you still got to go to Auburn. You got to go to Clemson. We have to go to Florida. And I think at the end of the day, despite all the talk about Georgia, I think we beat them at home, and in the East will come down again to Florida, South Carolina, in the swamp, just like it did in 2010. And unfortunately, we don't have Marcus Lattimore to come in and rush for 210 yards against the Gators on one of the greatest nights of my life. That, you know, this is how bad it is. We get home about 3:30 in the morning back to Williams-Brice Stadium, and many of you don't know this, but well, you probably do, that we shoot the television show that night right after the right after we get back normally. So we get back and don't go home. And there's Jerry Spurrier and Steve Spurrier and Liz McMillan, our crew, the camera guys who were there waiting at 3:30 in the morning. And I go in, wash my face. Coach goes in there and changes real quick. We changed into some attire. I had written a script on my way home on the plane like I normally do. And I'm just so excited. I just cannot, I mean, I'm just so pleased for Steve and Jerry. Jerry is emotional. We're all just thrilled to death. And so I go in there to shoot the show, and my face is bubbling, and Coach is pretty normal like he always is on the thing. And we go back in there, and I'll just say I had a ride home, and we had a couple of beers in the locker room afterwards at 4:30 in the morning. I mean, probably stay during that time and go home. I can't sleep. Well, the team got in it, of course, with me. I fly with the team, and they had gotten in at 3:30 or 4:30. Well, then I get up in the paper the next day when I finally got up, probably 11 o'clock, reading the paper the next morning, and I see that Marcus Lattimore had taken 3 of his teammates to church at 7:30 a.m. I didn't feel very good about what I had done the night before. He ran for 210 yards, took his teammates to church the next morning while I laid out in the locker room doing what I probably wasn't supposed to be doing. But that's the kind of guys that we've had on the football team the last couple of years. There haven't been any problems. They've been good guys. You can't put 95 lawyers in a room and not have 10 turds. We all know that. For that matter, the rest of your businesses, insurance people, you put 100 insurance executives or whatever bankers in a room, you're going to have problems with 10% of them. We haven't had that as of recently. I promise you that. And we got good guys, good teams. We have a couple minutes left before we break this down, and I always welcome your questions because they're good. No matter what I say up here, I can never cover everything that you guys want to ask. Please fire it away. I will do my best to answer that. While you're thinking of that, and raise your hand here in a moment, I'll do what I normally do, which is to say I have the law office of Todd Ellis in Irmo, South Carolina. I represent small businesses and individuals in a variety of matters, including business disputes, collection actions, whatever it may be. And I welcome you to call on me if I can ever assist this crowd. Of course, we'd never have any problems in this room. We'd never need a litigator. I think we have a couple microphones, whoever has one.
So,
I know you don't need a microphone.
Clearly you've been hanging out with GA with your technical term about the 10%.
Yes.
He likes to talk about how you can't really polish those.
Yeah.
You know, we hear the stats of the grades that our athletes are getting, not just football, but across the board. And you talk about the character issues. I mean, are we as good and clean as, you know, as they say? What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, it's a great question. How are things turn the tide? And I think they go in cycles at every program, by the way. I'm not to say the high and mighty kids go to South Carolina and any other school gets the other one. I will say this. I think there is a huge difference between recruiting players at bigger programs who are used to winning, the Burnses of the worlds, the Northwesterns of the worlds, the Rock Hills of the worlds. Those kids, John, come in and they already have a standard of excellence that doesn't let them seem to drift as far from that standard line. The other one is that once Marcus or Clowney tells you this is the way we do it, you either get on board or you're off. Those guys then learn from that level of people and then move on to the next ones. And I think that's what's helped out at our program. I think it helps out at almost every major program. Good question. Anybody else? Yes? Hello.
Some of us can't get enough of David Clowney. You were in the locker room with him 3 years, so forth. Can you tell another story or two?
Well, telling stories in the locker room about players is not always a good idea. Well, I mean, I don't know. First of all, he's a gentle giant in a lot of ways. One of my favorite stories was a neighbor friend of mine who's got a daughter who's a redhead. If she's standing up on this table, is only about that high. And she says JD's her favorite player, and that's barely what she can say anyhow. And JD was walking back from one of those preseason meetings he's got to have with academic people and everything else in the hot sun, and they stopped on the side of the road and jumps out of the car literally at him at that time with this little redhead girl and said, you know, can you please take a picture with him, talk. He sat down and talked to her for 5 minutes and spent the time, took pictures and did all that on his own schedule. And that's the type of guy he is. And I wish him the best as well. But I just don't think people realize when you put it in terms of the guy literally played for us last year with a chance of losing a lifetime of money and career. I mean, in any given second. And everybody talks about insurance policies. Those of you in the insurance industry, I have great respect for them. Many of my friends are. But what you don't realize is those insurance policies that supposedly cover these players in case they're injured from their NFL careers are only policies that pay off with a total disability. So if these great orthopedics that we all know and serve the universities say, no, Marcus's knee is damaged, he has a disability rating, but he can play football, those policies don't pay off. So if you drop from a first rounder to a sixth rounder, you just lost $14 million without a policy to cover that. So that's a big part. Oh, Lord, help me, but I'm calling on Dan Lee. Dan.
Oh, hi, Todd. I just want to be perfectly clear with this. When y'all played Michigan, the hit was a busted. Lawan missed his assignment.
Dan's a neighbor friend of mine, is a huge Michigan guy. And let's just say I texted him a few times during that ball game, and he came over to the draft to watch the draft with me, and they showed it about 400 times during that night, and he kept saying it was a busted play. All I know is they're still looking for that helmet on the moon, is what I know too.
How you doing?
Good.
For the longest time, Florida was the biggest high school football high school that went to colleges. And for the longest time, they were saying Florida is the biggest football when it comes to recruiting. Texas is another. Where do you think South Carolina is when it comes to local talent, staying in a local state, and what do you think can happen to make that even a better possibility?
That's a great question. I do get it all the time, and it's changed actually since I've been at South Carolina. Well, first of all, let me say this. South Carolina is still fourth or third every year in having players that resided or played in South Carolina, the high schools, end up in the NFL. That's shocking for a state our size of only about 4 million people. So it's pretty darn good right now. But recruiting overall in numbers, forget the NFL, is so much tougher in South Carolina because we are so rural. Atlanta, Georgia has more high schools than all of South Carolina combined around the rural area around the area of Atlanta, in the suburbs of Atlanta. So it's a pure numbers issue. Our players are really probably better and better coached. The problem is there's not as many of them. And that's why you need to go to Florida. And in Dade County, there'll be 100 blue chip prospects in that county alone because of the pure numbers they are. In Atlanta, the same way, and that's why you have to recruit. So there's not much you can do because the quality is there. The coaching's excellent, a lot of great players. You just don't have enough to equal that many blue chip players, in my opinion. And we're going to continue to go to the Atlanta area. We're going to continue to go to the Florida area to recruit players, and we're going to continue to try to get the best of the South Carolina players. But there's just not, overall, there's not a whole lot of them that can play at that major Division I level. Yes. Yes, sir, in the back.
I wasn't going to say anything until Dan Lee asked a question. I want you to know that Dan Lee has never in his lifetime asked the speaker a question.
Y'all do realize that if it's economic development or whatever, he has no input on that whatsoever. Football is about all we can talk about.
It's been a long time, but over the years I've been my father's question. I've known your mom and your dad, your brother. And
Thank you.
You spoke to the club in 1997 or 1998, and you spoke about a charity that dealt with kids with cancer, as I recall. And
Yes.
It was a wonderful talk. But the comment I want to make that I made then and I'll make again now, I think sometimes we lose sight of the benefits of having the University of South Carolina here. And one of those things we sometimes forget about is you get people the quality of Todd Ellis to come here to play ball.
Shoot. No, you're nice. That's very nice. Whatever I've given, I've gained back 100 times with the University of South Carolina, and I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, Jimmy? And then back in the back next.
I just want everybody to know that I have, it's very nice to be able to work with a professional attorney. I have been sued by him before. and it was not a big deal. I mean, it was kind of a nuisance type lawsuit, and he is very professional, and we handled it the way it should have been handled. It was not a big deal. But then my second question is the Miller kid from Spring Valley. We did not seem to really attempt to recruit him, and I imagine that's because of his dad, but do you have an opinion of that?
Well, I don't know if I've got an opinion. Well, first of all, I wasn't going to mention anyone I had sued in the room today. No, Jimmy, I respect your work on all that. I appreciate the question as well. About Christian Miller, Corey Miller's son, who was Player of the Year in the state, who went on to Alabama as well. I wouldn't begin to tell you every bit of the evaluation that's done by our coaching staff, which would include grades, character, ability to play in your system, likelihood that you would come. They have to make those decisions all the time. And that is, are we going to not recruit them because we know they're already going somewhere else? I think all those factors played into producing Christian Miller. And I will say this to a lot of kids that go to Alabama or LSU or to Southern Cal, are we going to see you again? Or when are you going to pop back up on that roster? And I worry about that with whether we're going to see Christian Miller pop up on that roster again. A great tackle out of Sumter went up to Auburn a couple years ago, and I thought, dear Lord, we'll never hear from that kid again. And he played a couple of snaps and never really got up in the lineup. He probably could have helped us a great deal. Now that's flipping a little bit because we've got about almost as good a quality as anybody else. But there's a lot of different factors, and that's why they're all deciding a little bit earlier now in the recruiting process because it's tougher. Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Hi, this is a shameless plug. Following up on the gentleman about Peacock Talent here. I'm Chantel, and I'm the president of the West Columbia Rotary. And I like to hear speeches before we invite them to our Rotary. You are really good. I would say that.
Well, thank you. I'm actually better in West Columbia, so you need to ask me that. You take this camera off me, I'll give you some entertainment now, I promise you.
I'm going to send you an email. I actually live in Irmo.
Oh, great.
Your attorney workout. And I was texting my boss. I worked at the airport today in May, so I was texting him. I said, how the hell did you use the word swagger 2 times? Wow. What's that? So I am going to invite you to speak at Casey West Columbia Rotary. We meet every Tuesday at 1 o'clock.
Thank you. I'll be glad to come. The Metropolitan Airport has this great commercial out right now with Ray Tanner. Y'all probably seen it where he's saying fly in, and we all will support the airport. Well, they asked me to do this one that I assume I'm not giving away too much. I hope they'll show it, but I'm just doing a voiceover portion. It's about Marcus Lattimore. And my portion of the commercial it shows mostly Marcus walking back through the airport like he's coming back into Columbia. And as he's walking out of the gate real slowly, of course, I say, like you all know me to be, a little bit too loud, here's Marcus Lattimore, opens it up, he's at the 40, 30, 20. Touchdown, Marcus Lattimore. And camera pans to him and he goes, guys, I'm just coming back home. So I hope it'll come out pretty soon. I think it'll be a good spot. Anybody else in the back over here?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I understand that Brandon has decided to stay at USC.
That's what I understand as well.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Well,
Or should have moved on?
Of course, that's between him and his daddy and mama, and I respect anybody. I will tell you that's another thing that you rarely hear of a player resurfacing once they transfer, no matter what the issues, and they may be legitimate issues. The problem is you just don't get that momentum again with your teammates and your coaching staff and so forth, and I hope that he'll stay. I think he has a lot to contribute. I think he will contribute to some stuff and not, but these are good problems to have. Do we want to lose players? People tweeted me sent me about Steve Spurrier losing quarterbacks. Well, the reason he loses quarterbacks is because he's got other ones that are beating those guys out. You do realize that. I mean, there's other reasons why. And somebody questions who Coach Spurrier should play. He's only won a Heisman, coached a Heisman, and won a national championship, 7 SEC championships, and now is the winningest coach at 2 different SEC schools. Why don't we let him do what he does and we do what we do is what I think. Got time for maybe 1 or 2 more. Yes, sir. Yep.
Question before we get to that one. Have you given any thought to what you might say this year that's going to get some serious miles out of Dabo like you did last year?
Yeah. Listen, Judge Joe Anderson and I are dear friends, and I have a case before him now, and he's a big Clemson guy. I have nothing to say about the Tigers. No. No. I will not. I stirred that up a couple of years ago, not purposely by any means. But, all that came down. Coach Spurrier used to always say to me, and it made me mad. I say, Coach, we these last 18 games, by the way, in our win streak, we've averaged that victory by 22 points. And Coach would say, yeah, but you know, we're no Alabama or LSU. And it used to get under my skin when he'd say it. It was on the call-in shows and all that. So after the Clemson game, or it was about a minute to go, I said, you know, as Coach always says, we're not Alabama, we ain't LSU. And it just popped into my head. I said, well, we ain't Clemson either. And that got attributed to Coach Spurrier instead of me, which he didn't say that latter part of it. He just said the first part of it. And then it got tweeted out. It got back to Dabo. And then Dabo asked the reporter 7 days later to ask him about that. And that's when he went on the 13-minute tirade about it. But, you know, and then Coach Spurrier had the better line even coming back. He says, that's not true. You can't believe everything you read. Only dumb people believe everything they read. I guess Dabo believed it. I mean, but I will not contribute to anything in the future. I have great respect for Dabo and Clemson, by the way. I wrote him a letter not long ago thanking him. Yes, sir.
First of all, in 1985, I was living a mile from Page High School, so I remember.
Oh my gosh.
In fact, my son graduated from Page High School also. Question for you though, big decisions were made last week by the Big Five conferences. What do you see long term as the effect on college football of those decisions?
Well, I could talk a lot longer than one meeting on this, but I have strong feelings about it that I don't know that all my friends at the university believe or think the same way that I do. But I will say this. Number one is it had to be done because lawyers like myself are a lot smarter than me were going to bring cases which gave those players greater rights, whether they're drugged through the courts or not through that. You know, the Ed O'Bannon case just came down as well on players' rights to use their images. My son came to me in 2000 and whatever and said, Dad, you're on the college football 2002 version. And I said, what are you talking about? And of course, the manufacturer of the game had created a throwback team. You could pick out number 9, who had his sleeves rolled up, looked a heck of a lot like me on the video screen or not. And it's not nothing personal to me. I have no interest in getting my image off the game, but that's what Ed O'Bannon said you could not do. And I have a problem with big third-party groups using those rights that those players didn't give away to begin with. What I think this will do and what I think is right is they'll bring it up to a true cost of the education, which will be a stipend. That stipend will be paid $2,000 or $3,000. That stipend will apply to everyone. I don't know why these commentators and these guys nationally keep talking about the basketball players and football players. There's something called Title IX that said women's athletics ought to get pay proportionate to who got enrolled in the school. That's the law. It should be the law. So the volleyball player will get just as much as the star tailback gets. And then from there on out, I think we'll go from there and see what falls out. But I think you had to do it. The lawsuits were coming. And I think I hope that's fair, and I hope that's the way it goes. I would answer any questions, I will do that, but I want to thank you all again. Invite me to Columbia Rotary anytime, a great group. Continue your great service in this community, and go Cox.